Just like with any game, sometimes there's weapons or multiplayer maps that don't quite make their way into the final build of a release. But sometimes these features are cut so late in development that sometimes the files exist within the public release of the game, or an earlier build will go online and fans are able to look through the code and discover more content that maybe wasn't originally known about. So today we wanted to take a look back at some of the cut content that still exists in the game files to this day. To start things off, one of the most interesting things to me is definitely in Combat Evolved. The Huragox and engineers from Halo 3 ODST actually were set to have their original appearance all the way back in that first Halo game. Now, Bungie had even talked about the fact that they didn't have the technology or time to really fine-tune these creatures for the game. One thing that's really interesting is that the engineers actually were in the game so late in the development that they made their way all the way into the official Premiere guide for Halo Combat Evolved. And sure enough, modders were able to locate some of the files of the Huragox and kind of bring them back to life in a way, even though they don't really have a working AI. And it's really cool to see what these guys looked like all the way back in 2001. Also, Combat Evolved had a gun called a gravity rifle, which was maybe supposed to be a Covenant sniper. And while it's in the game files, it doesn't have a full model for first person mode or a projectile with it. So whatever this gun was really supposed to look like, it was cut. Then in Combat Evolved, there also was a flamethrower that was set to be usable in the original Xbox build of the game. Now, if you've played Halo on Windows or even MCC, you've probably used the flamethrower, but it actually wasn't in the original Combat Evolved, even though it was in the game files. Some fans were able to restore it back into Combat Evolved. Also, there were two unused power-ups. One of them was a slow motion type power-up that made all the vehicles move slower and gravity on certain items would fall slower as well. And then this day, nobody really knows what that second unused power-up would have done. In Halo 2, there's unused enemies. Of course, a lot of people know already about the Flood Juggernaut, which was really interesting in itself. There would also be some Flood that actually would carry the Jackal shields, which would be super annoying to fight. There also was a variation of the Troop Transport Shadow, which actually would let grunts and elites just kind of sit there on a little couch while the thing drove them around, which is outstanding. And then by far one of our favorite things was, of course, the unused Warthog run that would have been used for the end of Halo 2. And it's just so cool because this was something obviously that was in Combat Evolved, planned for Halo 2, and then brought back for Halo 3 as well. And it is really cool that modders have been able to kind of recreate it so you can get an idea of what that level would have been like. There also were in-game animations for a lot of the weapons for sprinting, and a little Easter egg, I guess, hidden in there for if you decide to sprint with two SMGs. Interestingly enough, in the Halo 2 beta for Xbox Live, there actually is a different variation in the build since it was an earlier prototype, and there's a version of the Falcon which is flyable, which is interesting because we didn't even have a flyable UNSC vehicle when Halo 2 released. In Halo 3, there were some really interesting oddities that were found if you dig into the files of the game. For instance, there's some unused cutscenes like a video calibration with Sergeant Johnson. Now, the video itself was actually included in the Legendary Edition Essentials disc. However, there are still files and cinematic tags in the Crow's Nest level. There are also a few small cinematics that are still present in the game that would have just kind of gone in between some things that you typically experience just through the first person perspective, but sometimes they had a few extra lines of dialogue which would be kind of interesting. Also, if we look at the sprite sheet, which was typically used for giving you stats in your post-match summary, we could see a few things that didn't make it into the final game. Things like a plasma mortar, a Spectre driver, which was a vehicle in Halo 2 that wasn't in Halo 3, a Mantis, which looks significantly different than the Mantis we ended up seeing in Halo 4. And then this one is clearly my favorite, but typically when a game like this is in development, sometimes a placeholder dialogue is used so that when they're creating the level or a cinematic, they can kind of pace it out right before they have the voice actor lines to implement instead. And for whatever reason, there's still dialogue for Miranda Keyes' death cutscene, but it's just like maybe some Bungie intern recording the lines. I mean, I don't know if the guy actually was an intern, but he sounds like he was having a lot of fun with it.
Can't start your own party? I admit, I need your help. But that secret dies with all the rest.
Also, in the beta build of Halo 3, there was a multiplayer level that was allegedly supposed to be called Warthog Inc. And the description was Halo 3 Warthog Inc. Yet, we don't know what that ever ended up actually being. With Halo Reach, there's actually some really interesting unused armor abilities that were discovered in the game files that never actually made it into the final release of the game. For instance, we see the final names of Ammo Pack, Power Fist, Repulsor, Sensor Pack, Super Jump, EMP Pulse, and Shield Generator, meaning that there were definitely some considerations to other types of interesting armor abilities that would have possibly changed up the gameplay quite a bit. I really like the idea of Super Jump, and some of these other ones kind of got tied into existing armor abilities like an EMP Pulse and Armor Lock. Halo Reach also would have had a Board the Hunter type assassination, but you would board it instead, and the Gutas that appear in Nightfall would have maybe had a larger role in Halo Reach at some point, and besides an unused assassination animation for the Gutas, there were intentions for there to be options to have them spawn in Firefight alongside buggers. We also know that there were plans for some sort of Saber type Slayer mode that would have been added into Halo Reach, which ended up getting cut out altogether, though we did at least get the Saber and the Seraph brought back into MCC in Halo Reach Forge mode, though we would like to see a dedicated mode that lets us fly around in space and fight each other. Jumping forward into Halo 4, we actually see a ton of leftover assets from Halo Reach. Since 4 was kind of built on this modified version of the Reach engine, there's a lot of different things that were used either as placeholders taken directly from Reach itself that would later be changed up and reutilized later, or just some other things that are present. For instance, there's a model for the Halo Reach DMR instead of the Halo 4 one. Also, the energy sword from Halo Reach is also present in the files as well. Then the good old target designator was in there, hidden in the files, though it doesn't do anything. It functions the same way, but no airstrike will ever actually come, which is really disappointing. There are a few other newer weapons that were probably used for testing for different ideas that never made their way into the final game as well. Things like a disintegrator, which kind of was like a blue Spartan laser. There's a little gun called a Bishop Beam that shoots a little continuous blue beam. There also were some really unique placeholders for cutscenes that would show up in near terminals. And then there was the Revenant, which didn't even make it into Halo 4, but there is a version of it that is available in the game that has a much bigger body to it. And while for Halo 4, a lot of the cut content was kind of discovered by sifting through various different Spartan Ops levels. In one of the Spartan Ops levels, you can actually see the entirety of Noble Team minus George as player models that are just there for whatever reason. Super interesting because these characters' helmets and stuff aren't even in this game, but I mean, they're right there.
So since Elijah went on a vacation while we're working on this video that he had planned for a while and isn't able to record right now, so I'm just gonna record myself and add a few things about Combat Evolved Anniversary because there's actually something interesting I found. So basically, when you program a game, you gotta do a lot of debugging, right? And in Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, they actually left in the debug mode. So by going into the files and changing some values, you're actually able to press LB and RT to open up a debug menu that looks like this. Not all of these options actually work anymore, but there's like a mission select where you can select any of the missions from and load straight into them, which is kind of interesting, but the real interesting thing is the cheat codes actually. So basically, there's a bunch of cheat codes that you can enable, like Deathless Player, which enables invincibility, Infinite Ammo, which obviously enables infinite ammo, Bottomless Clip, which your gun never runs out, which is different from infinite ammo, I guess, technically. You can drop all your weapons that you have in your hand, you can toggle the AI, which if you do that, the AI just stands there and does nothing. There's a kill one shot, which means everything dies in one hit. There's a Medusa cheat code, which is kind of funny. Basically, if an AI looks at you and notices you, they just die. There's a bump position cheat code, which allows you to take control of an AI, which is very interesting actually. There's also like a switch camera cheat code, which enables you to switch between free cam, third person, and first person. There's no clip, which obviously, you know, lets you fly through everything. And there's a screenshot cheat code, which is also very interesting. Also, the debug menu has more options like unlock all the skulls, unlock all the bonus skulls, unlock the connect functionality, which is something they actually had in this game for some reason, where you could say throw a grenade and then the game throw a grenade, which was kind of useless. One that doesn't work and actually would be so nice to have in like current day is disabling the main menu startup intro, which would be huge actually if they added that into MCC. Because, you know, why do I have to look at the 343 logo and the Xbox Halo logo every goddamn time? And there's a few other things like they'll tell you coordinates or other debug info that you need, I guess, during game development. But now back to Elijah.
And then lastly, some really interesting things in the Master Chief Collection. If we look at Halo 2 Classic, a recent update from July 14th of 2020 actually saw some new things added in that came from various different types of existing assets. For instance, silenced SMGs that were from the Halo 2 Vista Windows version that were on that one Forge map that's often forgotten called Example are in the game files. Also, that Falcon that we talked about earlier from the internal multiplayer alpha was also added back in. So which one of these features was one that you really wish we got to see in the final release of the game? Let us know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe and notifications on. Check out our podcast if you haven't been up to date with that in a while. Link in the description too. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.